There was once a princess who had everything a person could ever dream of. She had a golden crown resting on her head, a palace built of marble and light, servants who obeyed her every word, and a kingdom that bowed whenever she walked by. She had riches beyond counting, silk gowns, jeweled crowns, and a name that people whispered with respect wherever she went. And yet, one day, she gave it all away. She took off her crown with her own hands, walked out of her palace gates, and chose a life of hardship over a life of luxury, all for the sake of a small, poor village that most people on the map had forgotten even existed. Why would a princess do such a thing? Why would someone trade a throne for a broken hut and a kingdom for a handful of starving strangers? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why Princess Elara made the most powerful decision of her life. But before we dive into her story, I want to know something. Where are you watching this from today? Drop your city and country down in the comments below. I always love seeing how far and wide this channel reaches. And if you are new here and haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell because we bring you stories just like this one every single week, stories that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's step into the kingdom of Aravelle and meet the princess who changed everything. In the heart of a vast and prosperous kingdom called Aravelle, there lived a princess named Elara. She was the only daughter of King Reynard, a proud and powerful ruler who valued strength, order, and tradition above all else. The palace of Aravelle stood on a hill overlooking the entire kingdom, its towers reaching toward the clouds, its halls decorated with gold and crystal, its gardens filled with flowers that bloomed in every season. Elara had grown up surrounded by all this splendor. From the day she was born, she was dressed in the finest silks, taught by the wisest tutors, and guarded by the bravest knights. She could have spent her entire life simply enjoying the comfort that came so easily to her. But Elara was different from most princesses that history remembers. She had a heart that noticed things other royals chose to ignore. While other nobles rode through the streets in covered carriages so they wouldn't have to see the poor, Elara would pull back the curtain and look. While the court ladies gossiped about fashion and gossip, Elara would quietly slip away to speak with the maids and stable boys, asking about their families, their struggles, their dreams. The people of the palace loved her, not because she was a princess, but because she treated everyone, from the highest lord to the lowest servant, with the same warmth and respect. Her father often scolded her for this. "A queen must maintain distance," he would say. "Familiarity weakens authority." But Elara never truly believed that. To her, a crown meant nothing if it didn't help the people wearing it protect those who had none. Far from the golden towers of the capital, beyond the hills and the great river, there was a small village called Marrow Hollow. It was a humble place, home to farmers, weavers, and fishermen who worked hard every day just to put food on their tables. For years, Marrow Hollow had survived on modest harvests and quiet resilience, asking little from the kingdom and expecting even less in return. But that year, disaster struck. A terrible drought swept across the land, drying up rivers and turning fertile fields into cracked, lifeless dirt. The crops failed. The wells ran dry. And soon after, sickness began to spread through the village, weakened bodies unable to fight off disease without proper food or clean water. Children grew thin. Elderly villagers grew weak. Desperation crept into every home. The village elder, a tired but determined man named Old Tobias, sent a messenger to the capital, begging the king for grain, medicine, and aid. He wrote of children crying from hunger, of mothers rationing their last scraps of bread, of graves being dug more often than anyone could bear. But when the message reached King Reynard's court, it was met with cold indifference. Marrow Hollow is a small village, one advisor said dismissively. It contributes little to the kingdom's wealth. We cannot spare resources for a place that gives us nothing in return. Another added, famine happens. It is unfortunate, but it is not our burden to carry. The king, focused on trade negotiations and border disputes with a rival kingdom, simply waved the matter away. We have more pressing concerns, he said. And with that, The plea for help was buried beneath piles of royal paperwork, forgotten by everyone in the palace. Everyone, except Elara. Princess Elara happened to overhear the conversation in the throne room that day, standing quietly near the pillars as the advisors dismissed the village's suffering as though it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Her chest tightened with disbelief. Children were dying, and the men in charge of protecting them were more concerned about trade routes. She could not simply stand by. That very night, disguising herself in a plain woolen cloak, Elara rode out of the palace gates with only a single loyal guard, a man named Corwin who had served her family for years and trusted her judgment completely. Together, they traveled for 2 days until they reached Marrow Hollow. What she saw broke her heart. The fields were barren, stretching out like a wasteland where golden wheat once grew. The village well was nothing but a dry, cracked hole in the ground. Children sat outside their homes with hollow cheeks and tired eyes, too weak to play. Mothers wept quietly as they tried to comfort babies who had not eaten in days. The village that had once been full of laughter and life was now drowning in silence and sorrow. Old Tobias, recognizing the royal insignia on Corwin's armor, approached cautiously and bowed. "Princess Elara," he said, his voice trembling with both respect and desperation. "We sent word to the palace weeks ago. We have received no help. Please, if there is anything you can do." Elara knelt down beside a young boy who was too weak to stand and gently held his hand. In that moment, something inside her shifted permanently. She looked up at Tobias and said with quiet determination, "I will not let your people suffer like this. I promise you, I will find a way." She returned to the palace that same week and stood before her father's court, pleading for immediate aid. "These are our people too," she argued. "It does not matter how small their village is or how little gold they send to the treasury. They are starving, and we have the power to save them." But once again, she was met with resistance. The king's advisors argued that resources were limited, that other regions needed attention, that setting a precedent of helping every struggling village would drain the kingdom's treasury. Even King Reynard, though he loved his daughter, refused to budge. "Elara," he said firmly, "a ruler cannot save everyone. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good of the kingdom as a whole." Elara left the throne room that day with tears in her eyes, but also with a fire burning in her heart that no one could extinguish. That night, Elara sat alone in her chamber, staring at the golden crown resting on a velvet cushion beside her bed. It was beautiful, powerful, and utterly useless to the people who needed her help the most. She thought of the boy with the hollow cheeks, of old Tobias's trembling voice, of the mothers who had nothing left to give their children. Then, an idea began to form in her mind, one that terrified her, but one she could not ignore. She did not need the king's permission to help Marrow Hollow. She had her own royal treasury, jewels and gold given to her personally over the years as gifts, inheritances, and rewards. She had land that was hers alone, granted to her by her late grandmother. And most importantly, she had her title, her position, and her crown, all of which carried value that could be sold, traded, or used as leverage to bring immediate relief to the suffering village. The next morning, Elara summoned her most trusted advisors and calmly explained her plan. She would sell her personal jewels, her private estates, and yes, even her crown itself, using every resource she owned to purchase grain, medicine, and clean water systems for Marrow Hollow. Her advisors were horrified. "Princess, you cannot give up your crown. It is a symbol of your birthright, your identity, your future as queen." Her closest lady-in-waiting, Seraphine, took her hands and said, "Elara, please, think carefully. Once it is gone, you cannot simply take it back. Your father may never forgive this. The court may turn against you." Elara felt the weight of their warnings pressing down on her heart. She knew what she was about to do would change her life forever. She might lose her place in the royal line. She might be seen as foolish, reckless, even shameful in the eyes of the nobility. The battle inside her was fierce, duty and tradition pulling her one way, compassion and conscience pulling her the other. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the children in Marrow Hollow. and she knew, without a single doubt, which path she had to choose. Word spread quickly through the palace that Princess Elara intended to do something unprecedented. Nobles gathered in the grand hall, whispering amongst themselves, eager to see what the young princess would do next. King Reynard himself sat upon his throne, his expression unreadable, as his daughter walked into the hall dressed not in her usual royal gown, but in simple traveling clothes. Elara stood before the entire court, took a deep breath, and lifted the golden crown from her own head with steady hands. "For years," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I have worn this crown as a symbol of privilege. But a crown means nothing if it does not serve the people beneath it. Today, I am giving up my title, my inheritance, and everything I own to save the village of Marrow Hollow from starvation." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some nobles laughed in disbelief, whispering that the princess had lost her mind. Others watched in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. King Reynard rose from his throne, his face pale with shock. "Elara, think about what you are doing. Once this crown is gone, there is no going back." "I have thought about it, father," Elara replied firmly, "and I have never been more certain of anything in my life." With that, she placed the crown into the hands of the royal treasurer and instructed him to sell it, along with her jewels and estates, to fund immediate relief for the village. Within days, wagons loaded with grain, medicine, blankets, and clean water supplies began the long journey to Marrow Hollow, carrying with them the last of Elara's royal fortune. When the wagons finally arrived at Marrow Hollow, the villagers could hardly believe their eyes. Sacks of grain were unloaded and distributed to every family. Healers arrived with medicine to treat the sick. Workers began digging new wells and repairing irrigation systems to bring water back to the fields. For the first time in months, the village smelled of fresh bread instead of despair. Elara herself traveled to the village once again, no longer as a princess, but simply as Elara, a woman who had chosen compassion over comfort. She rolled up her sleeves and worked alongside the villagers, helping distribute food, comforting the sick, and playing with the children who were finally strong enough to laugh again. Old Tobias approached her one evening as the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Princess, I mean Elara," he corrected himself gently. "You gave up everything for us. Why would you do such a thing?" Elara smiled softly, watching the children chase each other through the grass. "Because a crown was never meant to sit on a shelf collecting dust while people suffered. It was meant to be used for something greater. And honestly, Tobias, I have never felt more like a true princess than I do right now." Word of her sacrifice spread far beyond Marrow Hollow. Other villages, inspired by her courage, began speaking up about their own struggles. Nobles who once mocked her began to feel the sting of shame for their indifference. Slowly, quietly, something began to shift within the kingdom of Aravelle itself. In the months that followed, Elara lived a simpler life, without a crown, without a palace, but with a heart full of purpose. She helped rebuild Marrow Hollow from the ground up, teaching villagers new farming techniques, establishing a small school for the children, and creating a system where excess harvests could be shared with neighboring villages during hard times. Interestingly, the very people who once mocked her sacrifice began to see her differently. King Reynard, watching from afar as his daughter transformed a dying village into a thriving community, felt a mixture of pride and regret. He realized that true leadership was never about the weight of a crown, but about the weight of responsibility one was willing to carry for others. Eventually, the villagers of Marrow Hollow and even neighboring regions began referring to Elara not as a fallen princess, but as their true queen, a title she never asked for, but one she had earned through action rather than birth. And that is the heart of the story. A crown does not make someone powerful. Sacrifice, compassion, and the courage to stand up for those who have no voice, that is what makes someone truly worthy of respect. Princess Elara did not lose her identity when she gave up her crown. She discovered it. So, to summarize, Princess Elara had everything a person could dream of: wealth, power, and a golden crown. But when she learned that an entire village was suffering while her own kingdom turned a blind eye, she made the unthinkable choice to give up everything she owned to save people she barely knew. In doing so, she didn't just save a village. She found the truest version of herself. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Elara's position, faced with the choice between keeping your crown or saving an entire village, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. I always love reading your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.